Alan Kohler here, and I'm talking to Justin Amos, who is the CEO of a company called Lygon 1B, and it's owned by Commonwealth Bank, Westpac, ANZ Bank, Scentre Group, and IBM. And its purpose so far has been to put bank guarantees onto the blockchain. So it's a blockchain company using IBM's blockchain infrastructure, and it's digitizing onto distributed ledgers bank guarantees, which are used in all sorts of commercial transactions like leases and so on. And what I wanted to know from him was whether this is the beginning of something much larger, whether this is because this is the first big commercial use of blockchain technology. And I thought it'd be useful for everyone to understand whether this is the beginning of something quite large. That is to say, the use of blockchain in commerce broadly, and whether he and the rest of them at Lygon 1B are kind of forging a path for this on behalf of its shareholders. And the answer is that it is. And they're moving on to workers' compensation contracts next, and then they've got a pipeline of other things to do. But look, I thought it'd be educational at least to understand what they're up to and what is possible and how big a deal blockchain might now be in commerce. So here's Justin Amos, the CEO of Lygon 1B. Well, Justin, could you just describe what you guys have invented and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lygon 1B is our company name. The platform that we brought to market is called Lygon Arc. And over the course of the last 3 years, the invention that's been brought to market is a digital bank guarantee that's fully approved and standardized by the main issuers that we've been working with. And those issuers, as you probably know by now, are ANZ, CBA, Westpac. And in the early days, also credit has to be mentioned to NAB, who are very much involved as well.
Right, but I suppose the purpose of talking to you and what's kind of interesting about it is not just that you're digitizing bank guarantees, which have always been on paper, but that you're using the blockchain. So can you explain how you're using the blockchain and I guess whether this is what seems to be one of the first kind of mainstream uses of blockchain in banking, other than cryptocurrencies and so on.
Yeah, I guess the question could also be put as to why you're using the blockchain, right? So if I just kind of let you know the journey on how we came to be here is probably a good way of explaining it to everybody.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago, there was a banking customer roundtable, and the request from the bank's customers was, if you can do anything for us, can you please change the bank guarantee process? So there was a legitimate industry-wide issue with using paper, because paper costs, it destroys, it takes for ages. You rely on other people to get it to and from your employees, to and from the participants or applicants that need a bank guarantee. So they asked, can you change this? And it wasn't an immediate response, was like, yeah, we're going to use distributed ledger technology or blockchain. That went through a series of evaluations as to what is the appropriate technology base for a network-wide problem. Coming from a distributed angle, it made sense to examine that. Particularly at the time, there was a significant amount of almost euphoric press coverage on Bitcoin and distributed technologies and blockchains. That doesn't necessarily mean it was the right solution for this, but the due diligence was done, and it was described that it was the right technology if it was mature enough and if it could work appropriately. So what followed that was an evaluation of different DLTs or blockchain service providers, where you have your public networks and your private ledgers. And within banking and financial markets, particularly, and trust, where there is a lot of value and information on a shared network, it's pretty obvious that you go with a private ledger solution rather than a public ledger solution like Bitcoin. And so that kind of narrows down the field. And IBM came out as the obvious winner of that process. And there's some good candidates in there as well, right? So,
who else?
R3, is quite a well-known one in financial markets. It was considered, plus also digital asset and DAML and using those types of technologies to work across other types of chains. So it was quite a deep dive on the technology, and it came up trumps with IBM, not just because of the Hyperledger blockchain that they have, but also because of the cloud security that IBM also come with.
I presume also because of the old aphorism that nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've heard that quite a few times in my 25-year career, and sometimes I scratch my head. But yeah, you have to make something work, and in a network solution, you have to have trust, and people trust big companies. It wouldn't work if Justin Amos and team turned up with a bunch of developers and started writing from scratch a distributed technology solution. Nobody would trust us. So it's the right combination.
So can you explain how I suppose one thing we should do is step back a bit and explain what a bank guarantee is and why it's so who uses it, and what it's used for, and then perhaps you can sort of segue from that into how blockchain is used to replace paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So the market size, for example, of bank guarantees as they are today, so there's kind of boundaries as to what paper can do. So the bank guarantee market today is estimated at any 1 year, there's 400,000 live guarantees in a paper form somewhere in a box.
But who are the counterparties in bank guarantees typically?
Yep. Typically, there is 3 users or parties to an agreement. You have an applicant, so somebody that needs to get a guarantee for a commercial purpose. You have the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is the party that's asking, that will hold the guarantee. Think of it as an insurance piece of paper from a credit perspective or otherwise. I can get into some details in a sec. And then you have the issuer of the guarantee. And historically, the issuer of bank guarantees have been the banks, the government, and also some insurance firms are issuing guarantees in this space now as well. The types that you have, predominantly, we've come to market in the first one in the world, which has been proven to be a commercial guarantee or a commercial lease guarantee. But there's far more other ones. And
you mean a lease between a landlord and a tenant, you mean?
Yeah, that's correct.
That seems to be the most common use of these things.
It's the most common understanding of a bank guarantee. Absolutely, 100%, because most of us in our life have rented accommodation, for example, or put down a deposit on an asset. So we understand that process. However, in terms of total number of guarantees out there and the velocity of the issuance and the term of a guarantee, actually performance guarantees far outweigh the commercial lease guarantee.
Performance, you mean in trade?
Well, there's a whole remit of performance guarantees that I certainly had no clue of when I started in this role, and we're learning fast. There's a number. For example, there's environment guarantees. They generally carry enormous value. One of our team members has actually recently finished working for a mining company where he helped value a $500 million environment guarantee for a mine in the Northern Territory.
So in that sort of situation, what are we guaranteeing?
Generally, it's the guarantee in an environment guarantee. Generally, it's guaranteeing that you will return whatever area you were working in back to where it was before. So air, quality of land, animals, etc., etc. So it's a real commitment made that the value will be returned to where it was before the economic activity took place in that area.
And so the bank guarantee supports that with money, does it?
Money or credit, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can lean into your credit facility for the issuer to issue a guarantee.
And in a lease, I presume the bank guarantee is like a bond.
Correct. It's very similar to a bond. And most people call them bonds as well. So, but there's some higher frequency turnover ones which are kind of more important when it comes down to like the man on the street and the SME community. When it comes to I run a small team of electrical engineers, and we're putting in an air conditioning unit into a larger building. I still have to go and get a guarantee that says my team will turn up on a certain day. We will deliver what is proposed in our contract by a certain day, and it will work to a certain standard over a period of time. And it's those that have the real high frequency turnover, and it's those that create a lot of issues for the applicants because they take too long to get them, and they have to do too many journeys to the issuer's branch, for example, to get it done, or they get lost in the post. They're the things that really kind of make a difference.
Okay, so let's move on to how the blockchain operates or works in this situation. And obviously, what I'm particularly interested in is whether this will be the sort of thin end of a larger wedge of the use of blockchain. It's kind of really interesting in the sense that this is the first big use of blockchain, and whether it kind of is going to inform and help everyone to use it in more things.
Yeah, okay. And I think you're right, by the way. This is the thin edge of many things to come from many entities that are going to bring solutions like this to the table. In fact, they are doing all over the planet. This year's already seen quite a few new announcements of new network services coming out that have gone live. They've come out of the labs and they're going live, and they're making a real commercial difference. But to us, how does it work? You can think of a blockchain as a permissioned ledger or a permissioned series of immutable databases. So it enables you to apply rules on who can see what data and when. That's the difference that blockchain or distributed ledgers make to network services like we've built. Could it be built on a singular database? It probably could, but you wouldn't want to necessarily do that because it's not going to future-proof your technology choices that you're making today. So there's at least 3 parties to a guarantee, as we just described earlier. There's going to be other parties, such as brokers that will bring to the platform, and auditors who want to have a view only, for example, that aren't enabled to make any informed event decisions on the nature of the guarantee or the financial instrument that's on the blockchain. But everybody else can see the data and see the participants that have been permissioned to see that. And nobody else can see that. So that enables you to digitize what you have and put these contracts into a digital form, and then build business logic into smart contracts that says, well, you can only do this and you can only do that, and you only have the rights to do this, that, and the other. And these are the rules that get applied. And that all then gets encrypted, saved down into secure data stores that are being replicated. So you've got this continuous series of records that are being kept that are equal and distributed. And our data centers are all over the Greater Sydney area. So from a BCP and a DR perspective, because you're using distributed technologies, by the very fact that you're using them means you've got your DR or your BCP already covered.
The contracts are all sitting on the IBM cloud, aren't they?
Yeah, but that question makes people think it's a singular thing. It's a distributed thing. So yes, they are, but the way the technology is put together, we're not tied to the IBM cloud. We can drop it into the AWS cloud or GCP, the Google cloud, or indeed a private cloud. Part of our model is that the issuers, so the issuers in predominantly it's going to be the banks, they have the optionality to bring their node that they effectively drive can be deployed into their own data centers if they so choose to.
So can you use what you've done? Do you think that can be used, say, in employment contracts?
Yes. Workers' comp, things like that, absolutely does get applied to that. And we're busy negotiating what that's going to look like. It can be applied to the way this has been put together, and the real kind of value that was gone on before our launch in February, in my opinion and many other people's opinions, has been the effort and work that's gone in defining the digital deed. The time and effort that the issuer banks have put in to be able to agree to a singular deed contract for bank guarantees enables us to go into many other types of bank asset and digitize it. And that goes to your point earlier on about the thin end of the wedge.
Right. So this really is the start of applying blockchain to contracts.
It does indeed.
And so what else apart from employment contracts? Virtually everything, do you think?
Well,
I mean, it has been. I remember, like a couple of years ago, everyone was saying, "Oh, look, blockchain's going to change the world because all contracts will eventually be on blockchain," and kind of nothing happened over that time. And obviously, what was going on was that there was a duck paddling furiously under the water. In the case of you, anyway. I mean, that was you. That's what you guys were doing, and you've come up with it now.
Yeah, I mean, the engineering that's gone into blockchain solutions really since the advent of Bitcoin and then the white paper, and people started reading it and they started applying that technical architecture that was put together in that paper. These technologies all existed prior to that. It's just that some very clever people decided to put them together and come up with something that gripped people's imagination. And then everybody else started going, well, hang on a minute, that applies to so many different parts of commerce. What can we do and what's going to work well? And that required quite a lot of investment. Lots of developers around the world working for open source initiatives, coming up with ideas, coding it, and then realizing it doesn't just quite work. And then they're throwing it away and doing it again. And so that's why, from really 2014, there's been some significant investment going into this across the planet. A lot of that's been thrown away, trying to come up with the right combination of architectures that fits the problem that they're trying to solve for. Because some were too heavy into the kind of like the cybersecurity side and didn't give you enough leeway on the business logic side. Some people applied business logic at the ledger layer. Some people pulled it out and put it into kind of like the stack, but not really in the ledger. And there's always confusion around what smart contracts means. Do I go private? Do I go public? Do I go cross-chain? You had these kind of echo chambers where people thought they were building the next greatest thing and it didn't really work. So things like that. And yeah, the duck furiously paddling, no one's seeing the feet, but it's going pretty quickly across the top of the water. That's absolutely what's been happening. And a lot of people are having a lot of success.
So I presume you're not the only one doing this sort of thing. How much activity is going on around the world in applying blockchain to contracts?
We aren't the only people doing it. But we are, as far as we know, and we've done a lot of research on this, the first to come together to agree a standard deed that's been digitized on our platform. A lot of other firms are trying to do this in our space, not necessarily even on blockchains too, but without actually coming to a standard. Australia is the first country to come together on a single standard, and then you can just pivot off that into other digital contracts.
Right.
Yeah.
Just back to what you were saying before. Did you say that NAB was involved? Did they drop out or what?
Yes, they were. They were heavily involved. They're very much part of the early narrative because the Lygon story started with a POC, and then there was a production pilot.
What's a POC?
Oh, sorry, a proof of concept.
Right. Okay.
So the ideation around the proof of concept started really with Westpac and ANZ, CBA and NAB were involved, and there was also meetings that were actually held in NAB's offices back in the time. They dropped out about 18 months ago because they had other things that they had to focus on. But they're not. We're still working with them and talking with them, and we look forward to them escalating their focus and hopefully getting on sometime in 2021.
But you've got 4 owners: ANZ, CBA, Westpac, and Centre Group, right? 5
owners. We've also got IBM.
Oh, of course. Okay, yeah. And did you say that you're working on workers' compensation or employment contracts next? Is that the next thing off the next cab off the rank?
On the workers' comp side of it, yes. I'm not doing employment contracts in what I understand an employment contract to be, but on the workers' comp side of it, yes, we're having quite mature conversations on that side.
Right. So, and do you have a sort of pipeline or a list of priorities to get through?
Yeah, we've got a very busy year ahead of us in our pipeline on both the. So I described what a beneficiary was earlier on. So we kind of look at it in terms of our customers really are going to be the issuers of guarantees and the beneficiaries of guarantees. The third leg of the stool is the applicants. But they're already the customers of the bank and the customers of the beneficiaries. So whilst they're applicants, we don't necessarily consider them our customers. But in our pipeline, we have all of the issuers in Australia at some level of negotiation and understanding. So we're moving very quickly beyond what's generally known as the Big Four and working with everybody else, including government. Then on the beneficiary side, we have over 45 in our pipeline. We have only over 45 beneficiaries that we're already working with at various stages of the understanding and ideation and what it means. Because it's one thing to sign up to use a service, and you can use new guarantees going forward. But we then talk and say, well, okay, what about all the guarantees that you've got in a box somewhere? We know of a use case of a rather large beneficiary up on the Gold Coast that's had a load of guarantees spoilt in a flood because they were in a cardboard box in a cellar. How do you take those forward, and how do you scan those, and how do you reconcile those, and how do you migrate the what we describe as the back book of historical guarantees onto this platform, so the beneficiaries and everybody can have the benefit of them being digital? Because otherwise, it's going to be a real slow burn getting all new guarantees onto the platform when everybody needs to benefit from this. So we need to get into the back book and work out, well, how do we do that? How do you reconcile these bearer instruments that have been spoiled versus what your issuers think you've got? So we're working very hard to help our beneficiaries and educate some larger firms to help their customers, their beneficiaries, on how to do that.
I think it's amazing that these guarantees only exist on paper, and one copy is like a bearer bond in some way.
It is. That's how I view it as well, and it's quite eye-opening, jaw-dropping.
Yeah, it's incredible. Didn't they scan them at all? What's the matter with them?
It's not always the case. It's not always the case. Some firms have integrated to other platforms and have got copies that some people have typed in. But if you start typing things in, then you start getting typing errors, such as the term date or the amount or who issued it, things like that. One of the benefits that financial services have kind of gravitated towards the blockchains is the single point of truth. So there can be no human error when it comes to typing things out, because everyone's agreed multi-party agreement to what the details are, and they cannot get it wrong. So yeah, there are some services that people apply to in their ledgers, for example, but a lot of people keep the bearer instrument. If you wanted to do, it's called a demand, go down, the beneficiary wants to go down and go to the issuer saying, well, I now need these $40,000, please. You need to have the physical piece of paper. You've got to go and do it. Oh yeah. So it's all very well typing up and scanning it, but you've got to go and do it.
Right. Mm. Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, exactly. And that's the fundamental problem with paper. I mean, the environmental issues, which I'd like to bring up as well. The transportation of human beings backwards and forwards to get the guarantees done, and then the transportation of the guarantees themselves, irrespective of the amount of paper that gets used, and the print and the production of them, just the physical movement of people and paper. I'm going to work on the actual CO2 takedown that we're going to achieve very shortly. Is huge. I think we calculate it's like 8 million journeys a year that we're going to be taking out of the environment.
Journeys, ferrying paper backwards and forwards.
Either people or paper. Yeah, per year.
Goodness me. That's amazing.
Yes, it is. It is quite. Again, jaw dropping, eye opening, and it's all down to the physical nature because it's paper. If it wasn't paper, this wouldn't happen. No, we're not saying people don't have to go down to the branch to initiate something, but and become known to their bank and go through KYC and AML and all that kind of stuff. That's still there, and that's why it currently takes 6 weeks. But when it comes down to the actual issuance and the amendments and the demand and all this kind of process, 8 million journeys a year.
A few years ago, when blockchain was being talked about along with Bitcoin and everything, some people were saying that blockchain is as big a revolution as the internet itself. Do you think that's correct?
That is a very good question, and I've actually heard that question before. I was around. I used to work for JP Morgan. I was working on 60 Wall Street at the time when the internet boom took off. And I do often see similarities between some of the hype cycle in what we've seen over the past 3 years, really, in the reporting and the investment that goes into DLT and blockchain. I think the hype cycle is driven a lot by the crypto markets, both Bitcoin and the altcoin markets. Whether it's positive or negative news. So there's a lot of similarities to the two. From a technical innovation perspective, no, I disagree that blockchain is as impactful on everybody as the internet. But I would point out that there's innovation now that's live in the distributed ledger space that is actually enabling the internet to be what it was originally designed to be. And by that, I mean, an example would be if you're buying something on the internet, you've got a purely digital experience until you're paying for something. And then it goes into the old school banking and payments infrastructure. So you don't actually have a fully locked in digital experience, but that's changing. So distributed ledger innovation is actually creating the Internet 2.0 to help the Internet truly become this like global digital marketplace that it aspires to be.
Well, perhaps we can talk about that at another time, but we have to end now. It's been really interesting talking to you, Justin. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. Like I said, it's been a pleasure to have the opportunity.
That was Justin Amos, the CEO of Lygon 1B.